Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss overdue reforms to help strengthen our nation's local and state political parties. As former chief counsel to the RNC, I saw firsthand how campaign finance restrictions are hollowing out our state parties. This is bad for our political system, but fortunately, even modest reforms can provide meaningful relief, ensure better legal compliance, and decrease political polarization. BICRA weakened our local parties by choking off their ability to fundraise and engage in grassroots political programs, and saddling them with Byzantine regulations. Don't take my word for it. Experts from across the ideological spectrum note both the positive role parties play in our system and how BICRA weakens them. A few suggestions on how Congress can help. First, state parties have suffered because their ability to fundraise has steadily eroded since the enactment of BICRA in 2003. This is due to Congress's failure to index for inflation when setting state party contribution limits, even though it did do so for national parties and federal candidates. State parties today are stuck with the same $10,000 contribution limit they were in 2003. Not indexing for inflation means that a $10,000 contribution made in 2003 is worth just over $6,000 today. For comparison, in 2003, the national party committees had $25,000 limits, and today they are over $41,000. BICRA left state parties behind at the same time the law imposed other fundraising and spending restrictions. Meanwhile, campaign costs have increased even when accounting for inflation due to numerous factors, including increased early and mail voting. Yes, the emergence of super PACs has contributed to increased spending and helped reduce parties' influence, but their inability to remain competitive preceded Citizens United. Congress should raise state party limits and account for inflation, or these disparities will only grow worse. There's little downside since state parties are also one of our most transparent political entities. There is another reform that would help. State parties are permitted to have separate state election accounts, which in theory should help them remain competitive. But BICRA's federalization of our elections has made these accounts largely irrelevant. BICRA requires state parties to fund most of their activities in federal election years from their already inflation-depleted federal accounts. This includes voter registration drives and basic get-out-the-vote activities that don't even reference a federal candidate. Thus, a state party with few or no competitive federal races, but several state and local ones, must use only federal funds, even if they are flush with state dollars. Compliance with these regulations is also difficult. State parties are the most regulated political entities in our system because they have to comply with both state and federal campaign finance laws. And ironically, BICRA made things the most complicated for the least resourced political committees. It's hard to fathom how any of this prevents corruption, and in practice, it only stifles parties' ability to engage in core First Amendment protected speech and time-honored grassroots activities. It's common sense to reduce these regulatory burdens by not only raising contribution limits, but also giving state parties flexibility in financing these grassroots activities. 2022's ACE Act would have done just that by exempting certain state party functions from federal regulation so long as they were not coordinating with candidates. Finally, another overdue reform would be to increase the spending threshold for when local grassroots organizations must register and report to the FEC. For example, groups must do so if they spend more than $1,000 in supporting federal candidates in a year. Like the state party limits, this threshold has remained static and unindexed for inflation, in this case since the early 1970s. Compliance is also unrealistic. I'm sure there are dozens of local groups out there that have unwittingly triggered these limits and have not reported, nor can the FEC police enforcement. No wonder both Democrat and Republican FEC commissioners have consistently called on Congress to raise those limits and index them. This would avoid entrapping local groups that raise and spend comparatively little, but are still important participants in our political process. These are all seemingly technical issues in the overall campaign finance landscape, but I can assure you as a practitioner in this area, they are important. State and local parties are essential to our political system. Not only do they allow Americans to come together and exercise their First Amendment rights, they are also instrumental in nominating and electing our future office holders. Even the Brennan Center, an organization I rarely agree with, noted in its call to ease these burdens that parties are an essential element of our democracy and a moderating force responsive to public opinion. Easing regulatory burdens on them will not solve all of their problems, but it will give them a fighting chance. Thank you.